Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer B? The average school district in North Carolina has about 12,000 students. Well, we're going to continue our conversation about House Bill 704 with Dr. Dudley Flood. Dr. Flood is a lifetime educator. In fact, he'll say he's always been a teacher in every job he's had. He did teach multiple subjects, coached, served as a principal, but the reason why I invited you to come on today is because you joined the Department of Public Instruction in 1969 as a specialist in school desegregation and race relations, spent 21 years there. Now that was 15 years after Brown versus Board of Education that ruled that segregation was unconstitutional and must end. So I guess one question, what was there to do? Weren't we already past that point where schools were no longer going to be segregated?
There was a tendency moving toward, first of all, separate the notion of the dual school system having the element of legality attached to it. We were a de jure district as opposed to the de facto districts that were north of here, only 17 states that were de jure. That is, we had laws prohibiting the mingling of the races in the schools. And the process had begun following Brown. However, if you recall, the mandate was with deliberate speed. We might have been better at deliberation than we were at speed. We clearly were making progress, there isn't any question. However, the progress was not complete in that the General Assembly of North Carolina had remanded the responsibility back to local school systems.
And that was the Pearsall, that was the story of the Pearsall plan, right?
Yes, it was, which meant that in 1969 there were actually 152 school districts. And that meant that you could not have a class action suit against the state which covered each of them, and so you had to have individual processes going on. Now, about a third of those school districts enjoined themselves in voluntary compliance, known as 441 compliance, which means that they took the initiative to begin the process. And to be in compliance, they had to have evidence of a plan in place, not it having concluded, but it was in place and you could measure it and see the progress was being made. About a third of districts in North Carolina did so. Many of those having been districts that had very small attendance, 2, 3 schools in the district, and if they made one school, the high school and one school, the middle school and one, the elementary school, they had come into compliance. In those instances where you had much larger districts, you had a much more difficult process. And in places where you had multiple districts, you had an extremely difficult process. An example being Robeson County, for example, which had 6 school districts within it.
Wow, in one county.
5 local districts and then the county district. And it was extremely difficult to come up with a plan that was equitable and legal to suit each of those situations.
Now, let me ask you, Dr. Flood, when you were working for the department, I mean, you were out, this is at the point now that you were out there, you and your dear friend, Gene Cosby.
Yes.
You were trying to you had to bring the school district, help them with a plan, but you were also working with the community, right, to try to help bring them along. This wasn't something that was embraced in 1969, 1970, right?
Certainly not, and if the school district were to be successful, it had to bring the community along. Sometimes it was the other way around, the community brought school districts along.
Okay.
However, they had to be in sync because it would be pretty easy to sabotage any plan with which you came up if the people were not in accordance with it. So our job was to do each of those things. We also were liaison between the federal government in some cases and its extension into the school system. We weren't on anybody's side. We helped to mitigate against the bad effects so that the children didn't suffer.
Now, you spent about 20 years working on this. I mean, yes. I guess and obviously you're still passionate about it. I know
you're working on it, yes.
Do things like this bill to study breaking up these districts, some that were brought together for integration, does that send up a red flag to you? Does that sort of does that kind of hit you a little bit?
I worry about the unintended consequence. I'm reasonable enough to know that not everybody has the same motivation in moving in this direction. But the unintended consequences is separation And a recapitulation of all that we worked for. The fact is we have several generations now, if you believe that every 15 years is a generation, of people who have grown accustomed to interacting with each other. What we're still working at is developing equal status relationships among people. You're not likely to do that if you're separate. You're not likely to have any premise on which you can presume another person to be equal in status, equal in capability, equal in desire, motivation, any other things, unless you've interacted with that person. And so in having done the first stage, and that was to remove the prohibitors, the legal prohibitors, which we were able to do, we didn't do well with the second stage, which would have been that if we were to have gotten into integration rather than desegregation, we would have been working then on how do you develop equal status relationships? How do you inculcate the premise that it's a moral imperative, really, that people be given their individual right to grow to their greatest potential? We voiced that, but we never acted upon it.
And that's something that I guess as a society, frankly, we're still working on. And so, I mean, this is why we need to understand history, right?
We do indeed. And we need to project also some of the premises that are hardly ever talked about. Public education is an eleemosynary concern. Much like the fire department, much like the police department, it's not designed for my individual preference. It's for the common good.
Right. Well, with that, I'm going to close you on that one. We're out of time today. Look, Dr. Flood, I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time on the show today. Thank you
for
so
having
much.
me, Keith.
Yes, sir. After the break, this week's Leadership Spotlight.